Hello everybody, welcome back to Hunt Creative and Woodworking. Today we're going to be building some table-ready treefolk miniatures from paper clips, hot glue, and dollar store bits. Our first step is going to be to take some paper clips and straighten them out. I've got some pliers that I'm using here to straighten them out. We're going to want 6 of these straightened per treefolk mini. These are vinyl coated paper clips. I find the vinyl coated ones take the paint a little easier for those places where you're painting straight onto the clip. We're going to use 4 straightened paper clips for the main trunk of the treefolk, and we're going to use 1 each of these paper clips for each arm of the treefolk. And you can see that I've got a pile of dollar store moss and lichen just piled up in the corner there. This is a quick and easy project. You can make one of these in approximately an hour, and you can make several in the course of an afternoon if you would like. Just taking my time here to get all of these paper clips straightened up in the form that I want, and I'm taking 2 of them and bending them roughly in half just to make the arms. You'll see how I attach those in a moment. Here I'm taking the 4 to make the main stem of the treefolk. I'm going to grab one end of these 4 in one pair of pliers. I'm going to grab the other end in another pair of pliers and just twist them together. I'm going to split off 2 each at the bottom to make the legs of the treefolk. And then the 4 splines at the top are going to be the branches that hold the tufts of lichen and moss. And I'm just using my pliers again to twist these legs together. I want to take a moment and mention that if you enjoy these videos and get value out of them, please like and subscribe and share. It helps me be successful and it helps grow the channel. And the more it grows, the more of these videos I'm able to provide for you. I'd also like to apologize for my camera. It's having a lot of trouble focusing in on this shiny metal wire, and it's kind of bouncing in and out of focus. It gets better a little bit later in the video. But here I'm just shaping the legs in kind of a little foot twig to have the treefolk standing in a dynamic and interesting pose. I'm going to adjust the top branches so they'll hold that moss and lichen nicely. I'm just going to attach the arms by slipping the body of the treefolk inside the loop of the bent paperclip. And then once I manage to grab it with my pliers, I'm going to come back and twist it all together the way I did with my other treefolk limbs. And here I'm just using 2 pliers to hold it nicely so that it'll behave a little better. Sometimes they don't hold as well with just fingers. I'm just working on getting that all lined up here. Once I got it where I want it, I'm going to grab it with those pliers and grab the other set and then twist it all up into place. Just wind it around until it's nice and snug. I'm going to take a minute and bend that limb into an arm-like position and pose. And I'm going to attach the other limb going out in the other direction. Same process. Just clamp it around the body. And then twist the 2 halves of the paper clips together so that it holds snugly in place. It doesn't have to be a perfect hold at this moment because I'm going to coat the whole thing in hot glue to give it some body. we have our Treefolk armature all built and completed. I'm just testing the pose to make sure I like how it looks. And here I am, I'm just coating those paper clips with a healthy dose of hot glue. And that gives a little body and volume to the limbs and the twigs. I'm just using the paper clips as the armature underneath the hot glue. I'm trying to coat all the sides, and I'm not too fussy about the finish here because I'm going to be painting it and I'm going to be wrapping it in some moss strands. But I do want it to look believable, and I don't want any weird bumpy bits sticking out at an odd place. So here I'm just taking a moment to let the hot glue harden a little bit, and then I'm continuing to coat it. I'm not going to coat the 4 top branches because I like them nice and thin like that. They'll kind of blend into the moss and lichen a little bit better. I'm not looking for perfection here again because I'm going to paint it and I'm going to dress them up a little bit with some extra pieces. Just letting the hot glue cool there. I just took a paper clip and I adjusted some of the blobs of hot glue so that they were a little bit more natural looking to me. Pull some of the strings off, wave it around a little bit. And here I'm going to make a base for it out of a woodsy disc. You can get these at the dollar store. A little craft glue. And I'll plop some glue on one surface of the disc. Get a nice even coat on it, pardon the focus there. And I'm just going to plunk it down into a little glass full of sand and gravel that I have on hand. That'll give my base a little bit of texture. And here I've glued it onto the still wet base, and you'll see that this comes back to bite me a little bit in a moment. I'm just going to coat the whole thing, the whole armature, but not the base, with a coat of medium brown acrylic craft paint that I got from the dollar store as well. And I'm just using dollar store craft brushes. Here you can see the base popped off because it wasn't quite dry enough for the hot glue to hold it in place. But I'm not going to let that slow me down. I'm going to continue to paint this thing out in a medium brown, and we'll come back and get it glued to the base once that craft glue and sand is all dried up later. Sometimes the dry time in between these things is what takes up a lot of our crafting completion time. There's that base. I'm trying to cover up as much of this as possible. I don't want any of the paper clips or the hot glue to show through the brown. Although I will highlight it with some medium green and lighter green later, just so that it has a nice sunny feel coming from the top. Just making sure I get all of those bits of paper clip covered in the brown, and that's where that vinyl coating really comes in handy. Paper clips were got at the dollar store as well. And I'm just looking for something to set this down on while it dries. And here it's all dried up, so I'm going to reattach it to that base with a couple of dollops of hot glue on the feet. And I don't mind if the feet are blobby looking because they kind of should resemble roots or root bundles. And I have to apologize because after this I also touched up the paints with some greens along the top edges of the limbs, and then I used hot glue to attach some of that moss and lichen to the top. Here I'm just touching up some of the brown. So I used hot glue to attach a clump of moss and a little touch of sheep lichen to the top of this to look like a tree canopy or a treetop. I'll show you a picture of what that looks like in just a moment when I finish touching this up. I also took a long strand of the sheep moss and I wound it around some of the limbs to look a little more organic. This is the pose that it's in right now. It looks a little bit like Gumby from behind. So here they are with the moss and lichen tufts attached to the top, looking a little bit more like a treefolk. And then I also had some colorful autumn garlands with what looks like pretend bunches of grapes formed of colorful little balls of styrofoam. So what I did is I clipped a few of those little balls of styrofoam off and I attached them to the tree to look like exotic fruits from another land. So maybe these are fruit treefolk. You can see arrows pointing to some of the fruits that I attached here. I don't always use them as the same sort of fruity treefolk. I sometimes use them as plain treefolk. But this gives me the opportunity to blend in a little bit of a story involving the fruits of the trees in the sacred grove or what have you. And I like that. Options. And so here what I'm doing is I painted out the sand and gravel base in black. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry brush it with a medium gray to give it kind of a stony, gravelly dirt texture. I'm not too fussy about making the bases super pretty because I want the treefolk themselves to be the focus of attention and maybe the fruits in their branches and not necessarily the base. The base is kind of blend into the background a little bit. And just taking my time and hitting all the edges, and you can see the tufts of some of that lichen around the feet there. And I glued little tufts of lichen to where the hands might be to give that a little bit of an organic feel as well. I think it's looking really good. And here's the finished product, lined up next to some miniatures for scale and some half-completed armatures, just so you can get a feel for what they look like mid-process. Each one's a little bit different, each one's individual, and I like that. And you can see the sacred grove trees that I made from my last video in the background here. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you again in 2 weeks.